I have for you today really exciting and interesting panel, and I'm really looking forward to listen and to hear from you. I'll start with His Excellency Rafael Grossi. I think in COP28, which in the UAE, the successful COP28 we had in the UAE, recognized one of the outcomes, recognized the important role of nuclear in energy to mitigate climate change. How can COP29 build on this? And before actually we do this, how can nuclear energy mitigate climate, if I may?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I think it's revealing that in a panel like this, you would have the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. As you said, traditionally, the idea of nuclear energy was either ignored or even pushed back when you would have global climate change conversations. And I think what we had just a few months ago here in Dubai was a watershed in this regard, because nuclear was not only recognized, but the final document recommends its acceleration side by side with renewable energy. So under the guidance of the President, I'm sure we'll be able to build on that. Because of what you said in the last part of your question, it's not about what nuclear could do eventually as a plan, as an opportunity, is what it's doing right now. Already now, nuclear energy is making a huge contribution for a decarbonized, intelligent energy global matrix. It's around 11% globally, but when you look at industrialized economy, it's far higher than that. It's 20% in the United States, it's 80% in France, in Europe, where one could be led to believe by certain narratives that people are resistant to nuclear is on the contrary. 50% of the clean energy that is produced today in Europe is nuclear. So, and we see countries doubling down on nuclear, in the UK, in France, in many countries, with phasing outs from nuclear energy, boils down to perhaps one or two countries. Many more, and in particular, also interestingly, in developing countries. Not to mention, of course, here. I mean, how counterintuitive would be a few years ago to believe that in the Gulf you would have, would you have nuclear energy? And here, the Emirates, already today, 25% of the energy which is consumed here is from a nuclear source, and it will be increasing. So what we are trying to do is to integrate, as I said, intelligently. This is not a beauty contest approach. We are here, as the video was revealingly showing, we have a big problem in the world, and we have to make use of the best tools we have. And among those, obviously, nuclear energy is one of these. So it is about having intelligent, integrated energy mixes. Nuclear perhaps is not for all. Some countries may not need it. Some countries may have it or may increase it. The issue here is to have a team effort, if I can put it like that, where nuclear, which is part of the solution now, could be augmented or accelerated, as agreed here in Dubai a few months ago. And the role of the IAEA is to make sure that this happens safely, securely, in a way that does not foster proliferation of nuclear weapons, and also in a way that allows more countries, developing countries, countries that do not have this technology, to benefit from it.
Parag, I want to pull you in here. And I know the question is not here, if I may. And we were talking about it in the morning. So we saw paradigm shift on how people look at nuclear. So is this because people are being realistic on decarbonization? Are we talking more on the how of the what? We've seen the shift in countries, and we were listening to Rafael talking about countries are investing more in this. Why is that? Is it understanding, discussions, why people look at it in a different way than maybe 20 years ago?
It's an excellent question, and thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure to return to the World Government Summit. This is an exciting event that gets bigger and grander every single year in lockstep with the challenges. So first, let me endorse everything that Rafael has said. I couldn't agree more, and I'll add by way of answering your question, a couple of things. I think there's a scientific answer and a political answer. The scientific answer is the acceptance that this is not only, again, leaving aside political legitimacy, this is the correct approach. That is a scientifically true statement. It is not just part of the mitigation agenda, but the adaptation agenda, to be clear. And this is because a lot of countries, or globally, have underestimated the increasing energy demand that comes from coping with climate volatility. With rising temperatures and heat stress, the baseload demand for energy infrastructure becomes quite severe. And so one of the things that we do in our firm is model out the future heat stress of locations and the energy demand and the likelihood of blackouts, brownouts, grid failure. So there's really no way other than either through increased production and consumption of hydrocarbon energy or nuclear.
Yeah.
So I think that there's just a scientific, econometric, almost pragmatic acceptance of this fact. And of course the technology proving itself as safe, as deployable, and at a faster scale than before. And as you rightly said, Rafael, most of the world has already accepted this. Right? We can't let the global narrative be shaped by a couple of countries that have taken a kind of reluctant approach. You know, we were talking earlier about some European green parties that I've sort of been negotiating with for many years, but they will learn the hard way, for example, such as what happened with Germany. But that's not the standard setter. Just look at India. You didn't mention in your remarks, but of course you know very well the massive investments that India is making in nuclear. They pragmatically see no other way. Now let's give the political and geopolitical answer, of course, which is being caught off guard, the way Western Europe was by the current situation between Russia and Ukraine and the implications that's had. So if you take Fukushima from more than a decade ago and the war, you are in a situation where, in fact, you push countries backwards in their development. They rush towards more fossil fuels. That's no way either. So at the end of the day, we should really all be aspiring towards resilience, right? More self-sufficiency in of course, through alternative renewable energy sources in as localized a fashion as possible, and that's precisely what nuclear delivers, and that's part of it. But I just want to emphasize one thing: it is both the decarbonization mitigation agenda and the adaptation agenda. This is extraordinarily important. The one technology that actually brings those two together in an uncontroversial way that doesn't create these false divides, such as what we have heard historically in the COP summits, but which will not in Azerbaijan because it is such an evolved state of discussion now. But it's taken a long time to get people to accept that if you want to address mitigation and adaptation simultaneously, these are some of the key technological solutions.
I really like to say, and I will add to it, is I think it's important to have the realistic approach with the regional and local context. And we talk about transition, how you can decarbonize the existing energy transition if you don't look at the whole energy portfolio. So, Nigar, before I ask you the question, and the same will go to you, Parag, I would like to tell the audience that we're lucky to have two COP high-level champions. We have the Dr. Mahmoud, who is the COP27 high-level champion, and we have Nigar, the newly appointed COP29 high-level champion, and congratulations again, and we're looking forward to working with you for another successful COP after COP28, so we're all looking to be in Baku towards the end of this year. So my question to you is, do you believe that embracing extreme measures is an essential component of urgent climate action, or are there alternative approaches that can be equally effective without potential ethical dilemmas?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you and to say that it's my pleasure to be among such a distinguished panelists, and stepping up to this role as the UN high-level climate champion is extremely exciting. And it's very exciting to see so much energy from this community and towards the climate action. And taking this chance, I would like to congratulate COP28 team with the incredible job they have done. And in COP29, as COP29 team, we will take this legacy and we will do our best to contribute, to make our contribution for the climate action. Well, basically, the question that you are asking is extremely interesting. I think it's even tricky because what do we mean by extreme measures? Let's put it this way. Extreme measures the urgency for extreme measures is clear. Yeah, we all understand that there is a, let's say, the situation when the global world needs to take some actions towards the current things. And the video that we've seen today was really very emotional, I would say, and put it in an interesting way. On the other hand, we have to remember that we have to come up with this question. It needs some sensitive approach because there might be, theoretically, if we come up with extreme measures like in regulatory field, legislation, for example, or some social changes, it can bring some results, immediate results, but in reality it will come back with some negative results for economies, for more marginalized groups, and this is not what we are trying to achieve. And honestly speaking, how do you see it in practical way? How can we bring together all the countries in the world, let's say, UN countries, put up, let's say, 10 extreme measures and say that please go and implement them? Is it achievable? No, it's not achievable. It's not. So that's why, and also every country understands climate issue in its certain way. Some countries are hit by climate crisis in a more way than others. We have to accept that. So green agenda is not same for every country, for every nation. So that's why the discussions is also different. Answering your question, I think we have to come up not extreme measures, but maybe with alternative measures, let's say. There can be global cooperation, there can be some international innovative technologies that we all together have to come up with that will help to solve the problem. And also, since we are speaking in a broader sense about SDGs, I would like to bring some other angle to this subject. For example, I think that there's another subject which needs extreme measures to be taken, but which is being overlooked by international community, and this is education. Yeah. This is education. So let's put the question this way. Is education, does our education respond to the current trends? Is artificial intelligence changing the education, the way our children live? Our children live in a dual world. And education is not in line with what they will be acting. Like in years to come, the education they get will be irrelevant. We have to accept that. So another question, we had COVID lockdowns. Did we measure how these COVID lockdowns, what was the impact to education system, to mental health of children? So all those sorts of questions are here, and we need to answer them. And this is also something that needs urgent action. So it's an interesting and broad subject. I don't want to take time of my colleagues more on that, but I think that we need to discuss more, and we need to have this, yes, global approach, but make it possible for every country to bring its own contribution to the question.
That's a very good point. I think we discussed even the SDG Council's meetings yesterday about education, the upskilling and reskilling of maybe public sector. Let's talk about net zero, for example, which most of the countries agreed on. And is the public sector ready? The policy is ready? So Parag, essential measures or alternative, and why?
Public sector, you mean? Or society-wide?
Both.
For anyone who's been looking at the evolution of diplomacy more broadly from purely intergovernmental towards multi-stakeholder, we no longer create such huge artificial divides there either. I think most of the world has accepted all hands on deck kind of approach, right? We measure various actors, governmental, intergovernmental, civil society, private sector, by the resources that they can bring to bear to a dilemma. And we apply pressure and create mechanisms, instruments of accountability in those multi-stakeholder ways. And I think that has been the trend for the past 20 years, since the SDGs were called the MDGs, if you remember back that far. So I think that it's really a question of verification, right, of accountability. That's really the key thing. We see that with many issues, if you think about the publicly listed companies' commitments to decarbonization goals, a lot of it is maybe a function, or has been more recently, of the strength of the market, political will within national governments based upon electoral cycles. That is proving to be, it's making it difficult to lock in the kinds of commitments that we actually need. And in that sense, we need to have a lot more, structured, sort of, again, accountability by which, once commitments are made, they're monitored effectively, rigorously, and the resources are committed so that there is no backtracking on some of these, because we can't really let these objectives, the goal ultimately being not just to continuously monitor something, but to see it get done, right, be subject to this kind of political volatility and so on. And I think that's where the big gap is.
And what do you think about like the ethical? I like what Nigar mentioned about education. Are we looking at like the impact, the dilemma we have? Shall we look at education, poverty, or shall we look at climate or isolation, or they're interconnected?
Very much so. I mean, for anyone, our firm is really complex systems modeling. So you'll never hear me, refer to siloed approaches, saying this is the environmental, this is the education, this is the economic. I reject any such, categorizations. And so in that sense, of course, education has to be viewed in that systemic context, which is to say, not just educate one person or one community, it's everyone. Everyone needs to be educated, right? So I don't think at this point, again, we should be thinking in that narrow way.
I'm going to come back to you with another question about this, but I'll ask Rafael about the importance of science and technology in assisting countries in meeting their SDG goals. And part of it is the climate goal, of course, SDG 13 and others. And it will be great if you give us a few examples from the space of your agency experience on such efforts.
Well, precisely. And in this case, nuclear is very interesting, because nuclear is the only source of energy where it's not about using something that is out there. It's the application of human intelligence to create something that normally would not exist if we would not apply. It's not about burning something or using the wind or using the sun. It's about creating something out of fission or fusion, out of our intelligence applied to it. So this immediately tells you that what you're talking about here is a solution that is a science-based, is technology-based. And here, of course, you may see this model as one that would be discriminatory, in the sense that you would have a set of countries, industrialized countries, and other important global actors like India, China, South Africa, maybe Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and not many more. But what we are seeing at the agency is a very big push from many countries in the Gulf, as I was saying, where there was no nuclear energy here 15 years ago, and now the Emirates is one of the leading countries, 4 nuclear reactors, 4 more to come, etc., etc. Or in Africa, we had only South Africa. Now Egypt is building nuclear reactors. Turkey is building Bangladesh is building nuclear reactors. I mean, it's a very it's a global effort that requires sustained ST education, and this is very important because because of the multiplying effect it has. Normally, a country that has nuclear, and we've seen very interesting examples in the case of India, for example, in the case of Brazil, Argentina, and others, it has been that started back in the 1950s or 60s with this activity. It has been a multiplier that from that sector spinned to space, spinned to high-tech, spinned to computer technologies and others. So one of the most important areas that we have at the agency is to support national efforts, is to give them the elements, the tools to benefit also from this activity because of the internal economic, educational, you were talking about economy, also from a gender perspective, including more and more women in STEM. In nuclear, we have a very clear tendency there as well. So, and if you allow me, because it was mentioned here, not only in the area of mitigation, but adaptation, which is tremendously important when it comes to nuclear. With nuclear, we do radiotherapy and cancer. With nuclear, we do irradiation of food and food security. With nuclear, we do water management. So there is this dimension which is not normally known by the general public, which is a very important part of it. Let me tell you that you have at the moment 30-something countries in nuclear. Maybe you will get to 40, 45 in the future, but we are 200 in the global family. And all of them has one or the other dimension of nuclear, to develop drought-resistant crops, or to make sure that fruit fly or dengue is not affecting their economy and their societies. And all of this we do with nuclear. So this is why we believe that this is transformative. It's a democratic technology that allows to increase social levels, quality of life by and large.
This is great because I think most of us did not know the other side. So when I think of nuclear power, I think of the immense power of climate mitigation. And I know I need more in my daily work, to decarbonize my energy system. And even now, we started even discussing, even trading carbons being pink or green, but started even beyond creating that, that economy. So my question to you is, how do we need more? How much do we need more to meet our climate goals?
Well, I think, again, and I think you were saying this, there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to energy, and we have to, and to global warming and how to tackle it, and what kinds of elements we would use. The palette, the menu of opportunities depend very much on our resources and how we use them. What we are trying to do is to make sure that everyone can get to it. We can see that the general trend, if I can talk about one, in general, the International Energy Agency, the think tanks that talk about these things, even us, are looking into doubling or more. One other important thing that happened here in Dubai is that apart from the general documents, 20-something countries committed to triple nuclear energy by 2050 at one of the events we had in Dubai. It doesn't mean that every country is going to triple. It means that there is a very clear tendency towards that. In general terms, nuclear energy is considered a base load. Energy is one that provides for the very solid foundations upon which you can put renewables and other CO2-free sources of energy, because it does have this reliability. Basically, you turn on a nuclear reactor and it works for 100 years. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's not too much, really, apart from technical stops and things like that. So it is a very useful, very nimble tool that countries are having. More and more are looking at that, and others, perhaps in the Gulf, are looking at the example of the UAE. And seeing whether they could not also move in this direction.
Can I just add one thing?
Go ahead.
On the flexibility of nuclear in terms of its applications, just look at some of the fastest growing areas of energy consumption. Data centers, right? Some of the hyperscale firms are now looking at how nuclear power will be essential for that. And then again, you get the localized solution rather than overstressing the grid at a time when climate volatility is already stressing the grid. So if you want to pull on a thread that's going to solve multiple problems at the same time, that's one. Water desalination being another, and of course the water desalination water-related management systems are crucial to addressing our irrigation problems, as well as our industrial applications, as well as our growing consumer demand for water. So just an example of how this is so multidisciplinary.
Absolutely, and I think I want to, this is emphasizing the point that you said one size does not fit all. And I think the approach to climate action now And as Nigar mentioned, and I think we've heard the two ministers talk about their country with the country's context. I think it's important. The thing is, although you said alternative, but we do have some extreme measures in the context of climate change. Regardless, we agree or disagree, be it border adjustment mechanism, be it access to energy, be it taxonomy, but the question is, how might the social and cultural differences influence the perception of such extreme measures, if any, and I think we do have. And I think an important point we should look at is how can communication strategies be tailored to address these variations. I personally, there is a gap in even communicating such extreme. The question is for both of you, Parag and Nigar.
Well, thank you very much. Well, definitely the social and cultural environments matter, but I think to this part we have to add regional and national context. Because and communication also, these questions actually are interlinked because, for example, when the subject of climate action comes from up to bottom, it may not work. It should come from bottom to up. Because regional and national agendas are important here. So I believe that nation-to-nation dialogue is extremely important because every region has its own problems. For example, fresh water problem for one region, for certain countries are important. It is a hot topic. For others, it's not. So when we have this kind of regional platforms, regional dialogues, and then they merge into something global, it may bring better action. It may be more efficient rather than you do it from up when large countries do their decisions and then small countries need to somehow adjust. This is not the way it should be done. Communication is definitely an important subject, and I've been in communication for many years, and yes. I believe in power of communication, but in communication, the messaging should be very trustworthy. It shouldn't be manipulative. And the main idea is to engage everybody. So this is what should be done, engaging civil society, engaging private sector, engaging people from different regions, media. Everybody should understand the importance. And it's not only about showing the crisis itself. It's about showing the good things, and it's about explaining people how they can do, what they can do as a person, like what can I do to make the world better, let's say. It may sound populistic, but it may work. It works, actually. If we show them electric vehicles, if we show them some good examples, it's also an action to be taken. So communicating the messaging, bringing all the, engaging people, bringing all communities together, and forming this kind of regional agendas, and then making global action is the way forward, I believe.
Go ahead, but I would like to add layer. I know you have, and you get invited to talk to a lot of management in the private sector as well. So if I want to add another layer on the stakeholders that Nigar mentioned, about also private sector, how this will make a difference for them.
Well, let's start with that really, because now with growing regulations, beyond scope 1, scope 2, now to scope 3 emissions, even scope 4 is being, trying to quantify what that means entails. The companies are starting to preemptively take this very seriously because it's come upon them in a very short period of time. So the supply chain related and full life cycle related calculations that firms need to make is really how the climate agenda is directly impacting their bottom line. And I think that now more parts of the world are taking this seriously. This was driven by Europe and is now spread around the world. You can see in the United States with SEC and other government agencies starting to pick up on this. So even American corporates are saying, wow, I have to think about scope 3 now and maybe even scope 4. And this is great. So if we can have more harmonization of these standards, that would be excellent. Because otherwise you have a lot of fragmentation and arbitrage, and I worry. You mentioned border adjustment taxes. I think we have to look at this as a dual-edged sword, right? A lot of people, for not for protectionist reasons, they believe they're genuinely accelerating the pressure and incentives around industrializing countries to develop greener practices. On the other hand, it can lead to just more competitive friction and fragmentation in the economy, and even raise costs and be inflationary, which then reduces companies' incentive to absorb those technologies. So again, if you think holistically, you wouldn't necessarily race to these kinds of measures, but rather help people from the bottom up to be able to achieve, sustainable production practices, rather than trying to force it from the outside through border adjustment taxes, which have pretty negative externalities. So let's think hard about that. But I do think harmonization of regulation would be a nicer approach, and we're getting there in some of these areas. So I think that's important. Another point is to really endorse what Nigar said about regionalism, the regional level of analysis. There are parts of the world where drought is the primary consideration.
True.
In others, hurricanes and coastal flooding. In others, flood risk and so forth. So, and fires, of course, also. So we really have to look at the particular circumstances and emphasize what do they need for adaptation. Right? Because the truth is that even though decarbonization or net zero goals are a global public good, they do benefit everyone eventually in some way, shape, or form. We also have to appreciate that in many ways, climate volatility is a train that's left the station, right? Even if we achieve our Paris objectives tomorrow, it does not simply alleviate all of these physical climate hazards and risks that are engulfing many geographies in the world. And so, in the spirit of this point around inspirational mantras, for the general public, and especially for youth or for any audience, I like to remind people, almost in this way, when you wake up in the morning, ask yourself, are you moving resources and technologies to the people who need them wherever they are, or are you helping to move those people to places where those resources and technologies are available and abundant? And I'll be blunt with you, if you're not doing one of those two things, I'm not sure what you're doing. Right? And I say this to everyone in this room the same way I would to anyone else, anywhere else, anytime. Literally look yourself in the mirror. Are you moving technology and resources to people, or people to resources and technologies? And just measure yourself against that. And that's why in my academic work I focus a lot on migration, right? Climate migration. It is the one area of adaptation that is, it gets talked about in social and media contexts, but it doesn't get taken nearly seriously enough at the policy level. And that's no surprise, because when sovereign governments get together, perhaps the one area of global governance that will never really have a global regulating body in an enforceable way is migration, right? Every country has the sovereign right to determine who does and does not cross its borders. And we won't touch that, or we are not touching that, but we need to, because that's going to be one of the key aspects of adaptation now and in the future.
Okay, I'm fully aware of time, so I'm going to ask last question for Nigar and Parag, then I'm going to come back to you, Rafid. But I'm fully aligned about the education, and I think there is a gap in the education system, and we should regionalize it, if not nationalize it, to ensure that it's the bottom up. They're aware of what their governments are signing for and what's the impact, as well as what's my priorities. Is it water, droughts, and food security? But I would like to ask the other side of the question. Do you think the public discourse now is going towards policies that will help accelerate to achieve a sustainable future?
Yeah, public discourse is definitely important because, again, in different countries, the subjects are being raised in a different way. For example, in Western countries, they are more aware, and this public discourse around climate action maybe is more active rather than in other countries. But I think it is definitely important, again, to engage people. And when there is a public discourse, it's kind of a push for legislators, for politicians, for governments to act, to bring in real actions. So this is the reason that there should be discussions around the climate action overall in societies. And in private sector, for example, in civil society, among young people, it's very important to bring in young people for them to explain and to put up their, let's say, demands that what we are expecting. So public discourse is extremely important, and we need to make sure that it's there. And critical thinking is important. When you put up questions, you find answers. There should be tough questions, and then you will be coming up to some kind of a dialogue. So, yes.
What do you think?
I mean, I wholeheartedly endorse it. So when it comes to what we find is actually a generational gap, of course, as well. I think, present company excluded, in many parts of the world, you do find that that a younger generation is already bought in. This is a generational, civilizational mission for them, whereas it isn't necessarily for olders. There's a lot of research on generational psychology that speaks to this. Young people inherently believe that sustainability, in addition to, by the way, mobility and connectivity, are actually human rights, universal human rights. That is how they would define them. They would not refer to 20th century legalistic, charters and agreements. They would say, I believe in this right to sustainability. And I think I think that's actually baked in to the entire young generation in the world, and that is, by the way, the majority of the human population is young, not old. So I think we're pushing on an open door there. I think maybe in the spirit of this almost the topic as it's been framed, being provocative, or whether it's about clickbait. Let's talk a little bit less about standardizing curricula and all these things. That's going to happen. How about action?
Yeah.
Right, action. What are the things that young people can go out and do right now?
Yeah.
Right, to either in the name of climate mitigation or adaptation, give them an agenda, give them a checklist of things to do, and I think that's actually what is.
Do you think climate tech startups innovation can? We saw the air taxi outside. Can we see next year?
Oh, do we get a ride?
I asked a question, by the way, when they missed it. But do you think they aren't, because it's led by young people? So I believe
it's a great example. That would fall in the category, though, of micro-mobility in urban spaces. But at the same time, you also have a big trend towards walkability in those places. I'm not saying I don't love air taxis. Of course I do. I love all
I give an example. But we say a solution
at a
from
scale.
Young
What we need are solutions at a very, very large scale that apply to tens and hundreds of millions of people at a time. It's fantastic that if you think about Western European countries, young people aren't getting driver's licenses anyway. So they were going to be taking public transportation or air taxis, whatever the case may be. Let's think about the places, again, that are very, very rapidly industrializing, that are building new infrastructures for very large populations. Please focus on the solutions for them. That's what's going to make the difference around the energy demand picture.
Perhaps in the line of what you say, and I loved your idea and your concept of bringing the technology where it's needed. For us, from the perspective of the IAEA, is about this unleashing this power of technology and what technology can do to people. Be it in terms of bringing nuclear energy through small modular reactors in desalination, in energy, or to saving lives. Let me finish with an example. We have been talking, and there were references today about the global health crisis and what has done to us, and the realization of our common problems and challenges through COVID and other things. The IAEA, we created a project which is called Rays of Hope, which is about radiotherapy. I was 2 months ago in the Democratic Republic of Congo, all right? It's a country that has more than 100 million people there. And you know what? In this place, there is not one single radiotherapy public center in the country, not one, all right? So what we are doing about it, we are building one. It's not about, in our case, we are about delivering projects, delivering technology, and just doing it. There's enough blah, blah, all right? So go and do it. And I went to President Tshisekedi and I told him, this is impossible, this is incredible. So let's work together with the private sector, with Siemens, with Electa, with General Electric, with Healthineers, and bring this technology to people and where the needs are.
I think it's so important to share such stories, by the way. We assume accessibility for basic, and I think one of the discussions and the comments I really enjoyed yesterday in one of the SDG Council meetings when we talked about access to AI and ChatGPT. One of the CEOs of philanthropies who was in the room, he says, you assume that we have access, basic things. And I look at Dr. Manal with Noor Dubai, for example. on sites.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to share. Again, I fully agree with Nigar about the not only regional, on the national level. But I've been asked by my colleagues in the SDG on gender to ask you, Rafael, a specific question about diversity and gender in your agency. I've been asked this question in my industry, and I'm proud to say we have Emirati CEOs in some of ADNOC's companies. We are investing on this. What about in nuclear? What's the plan with gender?
When I became Director General of the IAEA, I had 28% women at the agency. Now we are at 45%, which means that it is absolutely possible. But for that, again, you don't need statements. You need to create tools. So we created two things. One is a program, not very original in the title, but very fitting. It's the Marie Sklodowska-Curie program, fellowship for women in nuclear. So we are providing the means for women all over the world to pursue careers in nuclear. Nuclear means nuclear engineering or nuclear medicine, as I just said, all right? This is one. And then we created another program, which is called the Lise Meitner program. Lise Meitner was a Jewish scientist in Austria who was, of course, persecuted because she was a Jew and she was a woman. Mm-hmm. And she had to leave her country. She was key to the discovery of nuclear fission side by side with Otto Hahn. Everybody knows Otto Hahn, no one knows Lise Meitner. So we created this program for women in mid-careers in nuclear. And we are creating a global platform of women working in STEM, but in nuclear, which is like a higher level of difficulty. It's not simply engineering, it's nuclear engineering. So I believe, again, it's about solutions. We know what the problems are. Let's create the tools, the instruments to facilitate the access of this talent which is out there.
Rafael, and Parag, you like this question because you were asking, well, you want to see one of your wish list adaptations. So we know nuclear with mitigation. How nuclear can help us adaptation, Rafael? Briefly, please.
Well, mitigation is the nuclear energy, more nuclear energy where is needed, intelligently, adding to existing mixes in the way it must be done, traditional nuclear reactors, small modular reactors when needed, making access in developing countries to nuclear energy in an intelligent way.
Perfect. Nigar and Parag, I told you, I asked you the last question. I take it back. I have one more question for you. So briefly, yes or no? You talked about education. Do you think we need more upskilling and reskilling in all stakeholders you've mentioned in climate change and sustainability?
Yes.
Perfect. That was a good answer. Parag, what do you think? And how can we do that?
The green economy.
Can we use technology? Can we use WhatsApps and AI and ChatGPT for sustainability awareness?
All of the above. I mean, from the technologies themselves, which now, of course, we're using AI to generate, in a way, synthetically what the data sets and technologies are that are going to help us to green our economies. And then, of course, the upskilling part is so vital because that becomes the economy itself. People are coming to the realization that the economy is not just a set of numbers divorced from our ecosystems, but rather, in a way, you have to put so much more emphasis on the green economy itself, and that is actually going to be how we measure growth. And I think, again, we're getting there.
Perfect. And I asked this question because I wanted to close my session with this answer. In my council, SDG 13, we did a survey, by the way, in the region with the public sector, because we had the same question. Do we need education or not? Do we assume, and back to your point, Nigar, which is spot on, do people know what they signed for? Do someone in municipality knows that he has to design or she has to design a net zero building? Do they know that to achieve it net zero by 2050, we have to do everything on net zero right now? And we discovered that they don't. It's not part of the strategies, as you've mentioned, Nigar. It's not, we sign, but it doesn't reflect on a holistic or the full approach of the national strategy. So that's an important point, and I think we should if we want SDGs to succeed, and yesterday we said we're not done yet, I believe it should be at the heart of the national regional strategy with a triple bottom line approach, We're looking at the planet and looking at the dilemma, looking at the social and the economic, ensuring that national and regional prosperity is at the heart of it. So on behalf of everyone here, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. And I wish you a good day. Thank you.